It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 665 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record. I've got two great conversations lined up for you this week. Joining me first is Patrick Purvis. Patrick is Chief Revenue Officer, CRO of DiscoverOrg. And following my talk with Patrick is another in my series of my conversations with my partner in crime, Bridget Gleason. Today's show is brought to you in part by our friends at DiscoverOrg. The DiscoverOrg platform is a game changer for sales and marketing professionals. This feature-rich sales intelligence platform is supported by over 250 researchers who continually update contact data and provide account-specific insights to help sales and marketing teams break ahead of the pack. See the product live at discoverorg.com/schedule-demo. That is discoverorg.com/schedule-demo. Okay, joining me on the first segment of the show this week is Patrick Purvis. As I said, he's the Chief Revenue Officer of DiscoverOrg. And in our conversation this week, we are going to talk about how to scale your high-growth sales team. That is how to hire, how to onboard, how to train, how to develop your sales team in an environment where there are high expectations for growth. This is something that Patrick has experienced firsthand in building the organization at DiscoverOrg, and he's going to share some of his experiences with us today. All right, here we go. Patrick Purvis, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andy. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. So just before we get started, give us a little bit about your background. I mean, you've pretty much, it looks like, been with DiscoverOrg pretty much your entire career.
I have, yeah. It was my first sort of real job. Prior to that, believe it or not, I played online poker for a quasi-living. And
how'd that go for you?
It took me 7 years. It went decently well. It's why it took me 7 years to get through undergrad. But we had a good time. There was a year there where my roommate and I, who is actually now one of our account executives at DiscoverOrg and our top account executive at the moment, we played online poker and we paid our rent doing that, and we made decent money.
Wow.
But there was a day in the online poker world that everybody refers to as Black Friday, and it was April of 2011, I think. And the Department of Justice came in and shut down all the online poker sites. So it was never actually illegal to play online poker. It was illegal for the sites to operate in the United States. And so they shut it down. We logged into our accounts like we do on any other day. Message pops up that says, your account's been frozen by the Department of Justice, which is sort of a scary message to see. And we'd been expecting it, for a while, but it was a shock for it to finally happen. And it was like, okay, I guess it's time to go get a real job. So I fell into DiscoverOrg.
It reminds me of a story. I had a client that I was working for a number of years, and he had an engineer that was sort of a critical engineer, software engineer. And the guy sort of had some productivity issues, and once we sort of dove into it, the guy was playing a lot of online poker during work. And then he actually went and became a full-time professional in Vegas. And I don't know if he's still making his living, but I knew about 5 years after that he was still making his living playing poker. So wow, you could have had a whole different career arc.
I could have. I think it was always sort of a means to an end for me, so I'm sort of glad they ripped the Band-Aid off.
Okay. So you started DiscoverOrg, and I said pretty much have grown up now as Chief Revenue Officer. One of the topics I wanted to get into is during that time you've seen basically all the growth, right?
That's right. Yeah, I was the 35th or so employee. I don't remember exactly. I was the third sales rep. I didn't know anything. I was basically fresh out of school, and they had to teach me how to use Microsoft Outlook even to give you an idea. And then I had to learn this whole technology industry and about the companies that we're selling to, and there are all sorts of tech companies. So there was a hell of a lot to learn out of the gates, but I was able to sort of wrap my head around it. And over time, the company continued to grow really quickly. To be honest, I thought it would be like a resume builder when I first started, and I'd be out in a year. And then I came to figure out that we have this great CEO. We've got an incredible product, and we were growing really quickly. And so over the last 7 years, I think I've seen it, go from a startup with sort of no real process and very much shooting from the hip to, today we're 500 employees. We acquired our biggest competitor. Right. We've got a really great sales machine. That's right, ranking. And I think that one of the things I'm most proud of is we've been able to learn from all of the sales and marketing leaders who we sell to and take all the best practices to assemble what I think is one of the best SaaS sales teams and machines that's out there. So it's been a good ride.
All right. Well, and it's not over yet. So I want to ask a question about that sort of got triggered, sort of off what I had planned to. But so just recently, I'd written an article saying that the title was basically why salespeople don't learn. And and it's certainly not my experience alone, as a lot of people say, look, we have a problem is that companies don't train sales the way they used to, salespeople, and there's a lot more pressure and put on salespeople to sort of be self-learners, learn about the trade, learn about the craft, learn about everything having to do with their customers, whatever they need to learn to become sales ready and sales relevant relative to their buyers. And it's hard. I mean, it's we don't get many salespeople as a percentage that show the initiative to go do that. So what would you obviously look like you're self-trained. It's largely based on your experience. So what did you rely on to train yourself in sales? What do you still rely on to expand your knowledge? I mean, because yes, you're CRO, but you're only less than 10 years into that journey, I believe, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So
plenty to learn still.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 40 years into sales, and I've been CRO and VP of sales, a number of companies, and I'm still learning every day, right? That's why I do this podcast, right, so I can talk to smart people like you and learn things. So how did you learn, and what are you still doing to keep learning?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I'll say that I think there's a lot I could brag about at DiscoverOrg and how we go to market, but coaching our reps and training them, the way salespeople got trained 20 years ago, it was a lot more hands-on, I think, and sure, that's not one of the things I could brag about because we haven't done a great job of that. We're starting that this year. We've got a finally sort of a true sales enablement leader in place who's put together a coaching program. We're launching Gong scorecards, and we're going to be tracking the progress. But up until now, it hasn't been that. We've been successful through the process that we put in place and the technology and our ability to leverage it. But right, in terms of my personal growth in sales, I mean, it began with sort of two things. I was fortunate to have two mentors when I started. One was our CEO, not much older than me, but he right, has a lot more experience. He's been, sort of in technology since he was 21 and in this space, right, inspirational guy. So I learned a lot from him. And then we were really lucky to hire our number one account executive a month after I started. And he had this background doing real estate sales, but he is just your classic natural born salesperson. So he came into the organization. I remember a month into working at DiscoverOrg, I went to lunch with him. His name's Stephen Warnke. And I confided in him. I said, I think we're really lucky you're here because I don't think these guys know what they're doing when it comes to sales necessarily, but he did, right? He just knew it intuitively. Right. He knew how to sell well. So I learned a lot from those two guys, really big mentors of mine. But then I think the biggest thing is we're really fortunate at DiscoverOrg in that our target audience is sales leaders and marketing leaders. And I have a very intellectual curiosity bent. Right. I'm constantly trying to learn more. And so my natural inclination when I got on calls, especially when I didn't understand anything out of the gates, was to just ask a lot of questions and really try to understand people and learn from them. And, I failed at plenty of sales where I didn't close a deal, but at the very least, even from all of those, I tried to take something away and learn something. So a lot of, I think my progress was, in 3 years as an account executive, essentially at DiscoverOrg, I probably did 2,000 demos of our product, if not more. And all of those were to salespeople and sales leaders and marketing leaders. And I learned something from every one of those calls. So it was a really accelerated sort of crash course that I was very fortunate to get.
And so what do you do now? I mean, are there books you've read? Like, what's the last book you read on, not necessarily sales, but something that you felt was beneficial to what you're doing?
Yeah, I would say the most influential sales book that I read was The Challenger Sale. It came out sort of maybe a year or two after I had started. And right, I think it aligned a lot with how we were thinking about things, but articulated it in a much better way than we had to ourselves. And then the other book actually that I'm almost finished with is Thinking Fast and Slow. And I think a lot of people have read that, but it's really an incredible book that's data-driven psychology. Right. And you can take so many different sales lessons from that book. The concept of anchoring on pricing, or there's a million different ideas. Every day I felt like I'd read a chapter and I would come in and I would be all excited and run into Henry, our CEO's office, and talk about it, to the point where he now gives me crap for no matter what idea I have, he's going, "Did you get that from Thinking Fast and Slow? Is that a Thinking Fast and Slow?"
Well, that is an excellent, an excellent
really
book.
Good one.
Excellent book.
It is.
Yeah. Afterwards, I fill you in on some of the controversy about it, but yeah, it is an excellent book, and
sure.
And certainly, I think this whole concept of the system 1, system 2 thinking. If you're a salesperson, understand this idea that people basically want to go with the flow. This is our natural inclination. Understanding that as a salesperson versus the cognitive unease, or he calls it, and so on, is, I think those are the framework that everybody should be familiar with. And again, that's one of those things that if we say, look, Mr. Salesperson, Ms. Salesperson, we just want you to spend an hour a week, turn off the TV for an hour and listen to a podcast or read a chapter of Thinking Fast and Slow. And if, as I think Brian Tracy, said, if you can read 12 books on your field in a year, you'll be, in the top 1% of experts about it. It's such a simple task, but it's hard to get people doing. I was wondering if you had any insight on how do we incent people? How do we motivate people who, unfortunately, the cases, as you talked about, companies don't train the same way they did before. I spent 10 weeks my first 12 months. I spent 10 weeks, in offsite training, in a classroom. And not that classroom training is the answer necessarily, but it's just, profiling the difference. How do we get people to, invest that time?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know if I have a great answer to it. I mean, I would say one thing is it's not even just reading subjects about or books about your field. I think it's just reading in general.
Well, I agree.
Yeah, it has
100%.
a massive impact on your vocabulary, your ability to articulate things, and it's something I personally like. It rubs me the wrong way every time I read an article about how millennials are different. Like, I think people are people, mm-hmm. and millennials aren't really any different than the generation before them. The generation now, the world around us is maybe a little different, but one thing I will acknowledge is we read less. There's a lot more technology out there. There's a lot more ways to consume content and media, and so my generation, I think, tends to read fewer books than those in the past, and I think that's a shame. And something we should be looking to do is instill a love of reading books, not just blogs and short articles, but real meaty books into people.
And unfortunately, tweets for those of us that are hooked on Twitter.
That's right. And yeah, and I don't care if it's the latest John Grisham, or if it's sci-fi and fantasy, or if it's Twilight. Like, if you read these books, you're gonna get more out of it. You're going to be more articulate. Your vocabulary is going to be improved, and all of that helps you think and communicate at an elevated level, which is really central to being a good sales professional. So I don't know what the solution is, but I think one of the solutions is really just to get more people reading.
Yeah, I mean, there was a quote, and I've mentioned this, and so regular listeners probably are tired of hearing me say this, but there's a quote that I love. It's one of the few quotes I've had around most of my career. And it'd be great just to sort of put it up on everybody's computer monitor. It's from Thomas Huxley, who was a British writer in the 19th century. And he said, in life, you should try to, I think he was the brother of Aldous Huxley, for A Brave New World, but or a relation somewhat. But he said, in life, you should try to learn something about everything and everything about something. And I think that'd be a great watchword if we get salespeople started on that track. So just segueing a bit is, you've built this team. You wrote this article, let's say an interesting article, sort of evoking Maslow's hierarchy of needs to building a sales team. But very clever. I love it when people go outside sales to do things like that. But you talked about when you start building a team, the first thing you're looking for, more so than your process, is the right people. And you use alternate words, right people and good people. I'm sort of fascinated by this idea of good people, because there's been books written about this in the last couple of years, with the premise being start with values and character more than anything else when you're building a team of people. And I'm just wondering what your thought is that, and then if you've been thinking about that as you're building your team.
Yeah, it's a good question. And actually, for me, one of the challenging things to interview for, to suss out in a hiring process, is values, character, grit, work ethic, all of those, right? These are more intangible things that you sort of don't see until you get them into the office and you really see them in that environment. So it's certainly things to look for, but I would actually say, and this echoes thinking fast and slow, although I started doing this a few years ago, but in my mind, interviewing, we put far too much stock into the act of an interview and our own subjective assessment of someone's ability from that interview. I think, thinking fast and slow talks about how bad humans are at sort of making these types of judgments. And so I learned that early on. I made some bad hires and I realized maybe I'm not so great at hiring, but
we all
not
have.
just me.
We all have.
That's right. Maybe it's everybody. And from the articles I read and talking to other leaders' experience, it sounded like a pretty pervasive thing. And so I thought, well, how can I take myself somewhat out of the equation? And we stumbled on a test that there's a Washington State government agency in the same building as us, and they were able to offer us this profile test that we could give to our candidates for free. It was both a personality test and then kind of a cognitive assessment test, an SAT test, if you will. So we said, okay, let's give this to all of our reps and see if any of this looks predictive of future performance. And we did. And interestingly, the personality side did not correlate really at all to performance. There was even qualities you would think, like how assertive are you, is one of the personality traits. You would think on balance, our reps would be a little more on, the good ones would be a little more on the assertive side. I didn't even really see that showing up. And granted, my sample size wasn't huge at the time. It was maybe 20. But there wasn't much of a correlation. Where there was strong correlation was in the SAT test. And that was sort of surprising to me. But the math and verbal.
Okay.
That's right. Math and verbal questions. And people who scored highly on that tended to be doing really well in sales at DiscoverOrg. And I thought, well, why is that? I mean, it suggests that they're intelligent, that they're quick learners. You get a lot of benefits out of that, right? You can think on your feet. You understand what the other, smart people that you're talking to are saying. You understand the nuances of their objections. There's a lot of benefits that come out of just, sort of being more intelligent. And then I think, math and verbal questions serve as a proxy for that in some ways. And so I said, okay, if this is what the data is telling me, let's go out and hire for this. And we actually found a test that it's from a company called Omnia. It takes 15 minutes to do math and verbal questions.
And so you dispensed with the personality assessment.
We dispensed with the personality assessment.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So just math and verbal.
That's right. We give that to all of our candidates, and those that score highly on it are the only ones I interview. And what I found was in doing that, the number of interviews I had to do cut down by a factor of, 3, 4, 5. And B, the quality of the reps we were getting and their tenure and their retention at DiscoverOrg really skyrocketed. So it's something we've relied on ever since. In fact, it's now company-wide. Every department at our company gives out this Omnia test for all candidates. And it's allowed us to create this really, really intelligent team that, where we get an environment too, where iron sharpens iron, right? It's smart people surrounded by smart people at all levels of the organization. And I think that's really made a big impact. So as much as I would love to test for, do you have integrity? Are you able to persevere? Are you a hard worker? I won't pretend to have figured out how to do that other than, again, relying on a subjective interview and asking some questions, but I don't, know that's great.
Well,
I would love to find
some companies are doing it,
by the way, who offers a personality test that can prove to me it's predictive. That's the key. I haven't actually found one that can say
they claim they
demonstrate it's predictive, right?
They all claim
but if you can show me that, I'm all ears, because I would love to test for those things as well.
Well, what some companies are doing, and this is a process that I advocate, is what they're doing is they're doing standard interviews, meaning they have maybe somebody come in for a multi-interview, 4 people they're going to talk to, and everybody asks the exact same question in the exact same order. And then you take some of the subjectivity out of it because you've got multiple people hearing the same questions and answers, or hearing the same answers to the same questions. And what they're finding is that then helps sort of take some of that subjectivity out of the equation. And it can be used successfully. I mean, I think that's, but you're right, it is hard. But you can also, in that format, you can ask questions that are geared to sort of elicit something about value and characters. But again, there's still subjectivity in there. People's emotions are tied to that. There's no getting around that.
That's right. If it's a good salesperson you're interviewing, hopefully they're able to convince you they have it, sort of regardless, right?
Yes. So no. I mean, that's so you raised that point though. Is the people that tested assertive weren't necessarily the ones that correlated to being good reps, and I think this is another sea change that people have to really acknowledge that needs to be going on in sales. If it's not going on, I know in some places it is that those old obsolete words we use, hunter, assertive, aggressive, blah, 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 aren't predictive of success in sales.
Yep.
I mean,
I agree.
Never once had a customer in 40 years of selling pick up the phone and call me and say, Andy, could you send out a new rep because this guy's just not salesy enough? No one's ever done that. That's never occurred.
Sure.
So,
yep.
The other thing I was going to ask you about is, and this is another concept that's coming into not just sales, but just seeing employment in general, especially in high growth companies, is how do you create your objectives for a slot, the non-quota objectives for when you have a new position open. And you're seeing some talk of this. Reid Hoffman talks about this in his book, about growing, is that they tend to look at jobs as sort of, hey, here's a 2-year slot. Right? Because we're at this stage in our growth and we know for the next 2 years we'll be here. So we want somebody that can handle this assignment. And that's not just generating X amount of revenue, but maybe it's penetrating these type of accounts because, we're in that we're in the transition from going SMB to enterprise or whatever, the company is going through. So how do you sort of define objectives for an open sales role before you start going through the process of hiring?
Well, for us, we're perhaps in a bit of a fortunate and unique position in that we've built a really great feeder system in our ability to hire SDRs, usually fresh out of college or with 1 or 2 years of experience, keep them on the job and train them really for a year, on average, a little over a year maybe, and then promote them into account executive positions. Because we've been growing quickly, we've been able to hire a lot of SDRs, but we've also had a consistent need for additional account executives or additional customer success managers. Some of them transition onto that side of the house. And that's given us a really great career path. In talking to the SDRs about what that looks like for them, I'll say, here's what we're looking for when we're looking to promote SDRs into these new roles. Number one is, are you hitting your numbers? That is important. If you're not hitting your numbers, there's an issue there that we need to solve for first. So are you hitting your numbers? Number one. Number two, so also, now we're going to start getting into more of the intangibles, in getting promoted. Are you a pleasure to work around? Does the team like working with you? Because it's just a lot more fun to work with good people than it is with assholes, right? So,
so you have a standard for what a good person is.
Yes. But I'm just saying we often don't know what it is if they're a good person until they're hired. You know what I mean?
I know, but if you had to go look at the people you have and say, okay, these people are good people, what are the common traits in your organization for what constitutes a good person?
Sure. Well, actually, two of the other qualities I'll speak to in terms of promotions, I think, are them. One is, do you help the people around you, get better? So are you self-serving solely? And some salespeople are, and that's not always necessarily a bad thing to be self-interested. In fact, being self-interested isn't a bad thing at all in my mind. But, are you paying it forward? You had people help you get to where you are. Are you helping those around you and elevating their game as well? That's something that we're looking for. And then number sort of 4 on this list is, do you have good ideas? We have an open organization, relatively flat hierarchy. SDRs walk into our CEO's office when they have ideas. They walk into my office when they have ideas. A lot of those ideas get put into place right away if they're good ones. And we're an experimental organization. It's a cliche to say we have a bias towards action, but if someone has an idea, we think it's good, we're going to try it, we'll run with it. A lot of those ideas turn out not to be good and we'll drop them, but we keep the ones that are, and that's how we evolve and get better. So all that to say, are you someone who's contributing ideas and thinking about the business maybe beyond your role? And all of those qualities suggest that you're, ready for the next level. And that could be moving into an account executive role, because those attributes play well in working with your customers and understanding their challenges, but also, beyond that into management roles.
Got it. Love it. So last thing you talked about was, and you just referred to that when you're talking about experimental organization. And it's always sort of interesting to get people's perspective because there's sort of two camps people fall into. Is one is, I'm going to set up a process and master my process, and then the people just become sort of interchangeable parts in that process. Sort of a la Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots, right? They've had a lot of success with that. Versus sort of what you were talking about in your article, which is, let's find the right people. Let's worry about the right people. Let's get good people first. We'll let the process figure it out. If we have the right people, they'll figure that out. I mean, are you still sort of on that track?
I mean, I would say it begins with the right people, yes. But I to a certain extent, I would hope that we can claim that the system we've built, is one that can withstand new players and change, because that's going to be ever present in the business. So, I think I would be proud if we were compared to Bill Belichick, and the Patriots and the system that he's built. I actually think that that's something we've done really well at DiscoverOrg. So we bring in smart people and they help us architect and refine and optimize that system. But the system is sort of a very central thing at DiscoverOrg. We from the machine we've built of 2,000 inbound leads a month coming to inbound reps, converting those at 40% to demos, to our outbound reps generating the other half of our pipeline, to our account executives doing 3 new demos a day, handing off to a customer success team. I mean, it's just this very well-oiled machine. So maybe it's a cop-out, but maybe half and half, equally important, right? Smart people to continue to run the system, but you can change smart people and the system won't fall apart.
Yeah, well, I mean, you reached a certain point of maturity where that should be the case, right? But yeah. But I like the emphasis on hiring the right people. It's not enough attention is paid to, especially in small, mid-sized enterprises. Yeah, it's a painful process. People want to short circuit it all the time. But it's interesting that you use that math and verbal assessment. Is it equally balanced between math and verbal, or is one more than the other?
No, it's essentially equally balanced. Okay. The way that tests outputs is it tells you on what percentile did this person score on verbal, what percentile did they score on math, and what percentile did they score overall. We look at the overall score. Our threshold is you need above a 70th percentile to even be interviewed, and then we're biased towards sort of higher scores. And
have you changed that? Because in your article you said 80%.
Oh yeah, we did. We did end up lowering it a little bit, actually.
All right. Was it because you couldn't find enough people that could score 80?
Yes. Basically, yes.
All right. Yep. Interesting. Well, there was an interesting article that was out in the New York Times within the last couple of years about a research done by a professor at Yale about interviews and talking about predictiveness of certain factors. And what they found is that they took 2 groups of people and ran them. One, they just hired them sheerly on the basis of their GPA, and then another group hired them through a conventional interview methodology. The people they selected with just the GPA, that was more predictive of success than the interviews. So that's why it's surprised me at all. Yeah, that's why kudos to you guys for sticking with that, because that's an important data point. So
you mentioned how people will shortcut the hiring process, and I think one of the temptations is you meet someone, you think they're okay, and because interviewing is painful, and if you do a lot of it, it gets painful quickly.
Yes.
You decide to hire people rather than interview 2 more candidates. It's like, just interview more people before you make a decision. Go through more candidates before you make a decision. I think that would make actually a monumental change in the quality of people we hire. But I think a lot of us interview 2-3 people and we go, okay, I got my best. Like I just did a search for a VP of enterprise sales. I interviewed over 30 people and I was exhausted with those interviews. But now the guy we got, he started this week, Christian Prussia, I'm convinced was the exact right guy and he's perfect. And I wouldn't have found him or known that unless I'd done 30 interviews. He was the 26th, or something.
Very interesting. Well, right. So you were patient and you waited until you found what you were looking for, which again, most people short circuit that. And it's like I have a syndrome, I call it the love at first sight syndrome. And you look good in a suit, you speak well, okay, you look like you could represent the company well. Yeah, I'm tired of this. Sure, come on. And that leads to disaster more often than not. All right, Patrick, unfortunately we've run out of time, but do Thank you very much. That was a great conversation.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks for having me.
All right. Talk to you later.
See you, Andy.
Thank you, Patrick. Again, that was Patrick Purvis. Patrick is Chief Revenue Officer of DiscoverOrg. Join me next, as always, at this time, is my friend, who many of us know as Captain Fantastic. We're talking about Bridget Gleason. Bridget is Vice President of Sales at Logs.io. Now, today, Bridget and I are going to talk about how to increase your close rates in sales. Research is finding that B2B close rates are falling. And it's really, a tough situation because close rates, increasing your close rates, is really key to increasing your sales productivity. And some companies are sort of getting the habit of ignoring the close rate. They're not paying as much attention to it because they've got sort of this bountiful flow of leads coming at the top of their sales funnel. As long as they close a certain percentage and hit their targets, they're great. But what happens if you don't always have the same lead flow? And actually, in many cases, it's less expensive to increase your close rate than to spend money on generating more lead flow. Anyway, there's trade-offs there, but this is something we're going to talk about today. So let's jump into it. Bridget, how are you doing?
Andy. I'm doing super. Fantastic.
Super
Great.
fantastic.
Super fantastic. No complaints. All good. The weather's turning here in beautiful Boston. So I think it's spring. Super spring.
Enjoy it for a week, because next week it's going to be in the 90s and it's going to be summertime.
That's fine. I'll take it.
I don't know.
Take it.
I wanted a little spring out east here.
Well, you know what? I take what we get.
True. Well, that's true. you don't escape. You don't escape as often as I do. When the weather's bad, I just leave. Yeah.
I know. Lucky you. Well, this is also, I can't do anything about it, so I might as well.
That's very zen.
Yeah, it's a recipe for more happiness. Yes, it's a recipe for more happiness.
Cool. We like it.
For sure.
Like it. All right. So, today I thought I'd get into something right up your alley.
Uh-oh. What? Running? Reading?
No, work. Actually, we could talk about running.
Oh, okay. No, we get off on those tangents. Yeah. What is it?
So I'd written about this recently, as I had just 2 weeks ago. Yeah, 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with a CRO, Chief Revenue Officer of a well-known SaaS company, a fast-growing SaaS company.
Okay.
Say that 10 times real quickly. And it was really sort of an interesting conversation, not necessarily a pleasant one in terms of, it was very friendly, but in terms of sort of thinking about after the fact is that, and you and I've talked about this issue before on the show, is so a conversation sort of started with me asking him, okay, well, how are you going to, plan to sort of keep up your growth and so on? And because I said, I was willing to guess, and I guessed, I said, hey, well, I figure your close rate's about 20% out of your pipeline. He confirmed that it was, after wondering how I knew that, but it's like the same for everybody in SaaS. So I said, well, based on that, I wasn't sure they were able to scale the way he thought. And he just sort of, what do you know, type thing. And he said, because he was pretty confident, because he had this robust machine he had built to fill the top of the funnel, and all I have to do is fill the top of the funnel and sprinkle in some SDRs and grow. And I thought, well, geez, that seemed really expensive. Why haven't you thought about, instead of adding more expensive people, is just figure out how you could increase your close rate from 20% to 21%, or from 21% to 22%, and then so on up to something that's a more sustainable close rate, like 25 or 30%. And it hadn't even occurred to him. So, like, of all the levers at his command, the ones that he was resorting to are the ones that were sort of the brute force, numbers oriented, as opposed to those that really have to do with selling. And I thought, wow, here we have CRO of a very well-known company who really doesn't want to sell, right? Just wants to fill the top of the funnel.
Does this CRO, is he or she also responsible for marketing?
No.
Okay.
No, they have a VP of marketing.
Sometimes the VP marketings report into CROs.
Oh, good question. I don't know the answer to that one. So it's possible. But I just thought, wow. I mean, for me, that just struck me for all my years building sales teams, building sales, companies going from 0 to 100 million plus. Yeah, the close rate was always really important, and also one of the least expensive ways, to try to scale your business, as opposed to adding more people at the top of the funnel. If I could just change that one part of the equation. But what was most disconcerting was the fact that it wasn't really even considered as one of the options.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I'm surprised by that.
But it's not the only time I've had that conversation.
I think maybe because it's really easy for sales, sales to look at marketing and say, just give me more. If you just give me more leads, better leads. And it's really easy for marketing folks to say, well, if you would just close the ones we give you. So that, to me, seems like just a really old, stale argument.
Well, but yeah, I know that. And but he wasn't, that's funny. He wasn't making the argument that marketing needed to give him more leads, because he thought, hey, we've got this machine that's generating as many leads as I can. My limitation was not enough SDRs to handle all the leads coming in. And so I was just going to hire a bunch more SDRs. And it's like, well, okay, but you can only do that to a certain point. I mean, at some point you have to start closing business. And this idea that really, if you're in sales, that you really wouldn't focus on how to become more effective and productive, actually closing a higher fraction of your supposedly most qualified leads. Because to me, it's like, gosh, if you really have a 20% close rate, then arguably what you're saying is we really don't have a very good product market fit.
I don't know that that's true. It really depends on who you're bringing in at the top of the funnel, because you can bring in a whole bunch of unqualified and your close rate's going to go down. And
sure.
You can have fewer
But if marketing is tasked with,
it depends on what they're tasked with.
Well, but let's assume it's a mix of marketing and sales. They're doing the proactive outbound, or doing the top of the funnel activities. Yeah, I'd still make that case that if over a period of time, and this is a company that's been in business for close to 10 years, is if over that period of time you haven't been able to refine your product market fit to the point where you're not having to bring so much crap in the top of the funnel in order to winnow out those that you can actually close, that again, maybe your product market fit is not aligned at some point.
I don't know that I would necessarily assume that. And I think just because I've, been around the block a couple of times, more times than I'd like to admit, and sometimes there are philosophies and where marketing brings in just a ton, they cast a really, really wide net. Mm-hmm. And then they use an SDR team as the filter.
Sure. Well, and a bad filter at best, but yes, go ahead.
Well, why a bad filter?
Well, because if you're only closing 1 of 5 out of your supposedly most qualified prospects, I would say that's a poor filter.
But why? Like, I don't.
So who's not qualifying the prospect? Because I think by any measure, I think a 20% close rate is bad.
But why are you can't assume that the ones that are coming in at the top are all qualified prospects?
No, I didn't. I was saying just the opposite, is that they're not paying enough attention to trying to bring in more targeted. They're, as you said, they're casting a wide net. But
that's true.
But too high a fraction of them are making their way down into the entire sales process. And
I would agree.
And they're not being
I gotcha.
And they're not being filtered out. Right.
Okay, I agree. Okay, I missed your point, which isn't the first time.
No.
I mean, if that's, I agree. No, they need to, the reason to have them there as a filter is so that the crap doesn't go, you're not wasting the AE's time. And then and then you would want to have and expect the close rate to go higher. And so I think you also have to look at what are you measuring close rates? Is it lead to close? Is it MQL to close? Is it opportunity to close? Is it sales accepted to close? Is sales qualified to close? There's a lot of different ways to look at it. When I think about it, what I care about and what I'm focused on is what happens when it comes to somebody on my team and they say this is qualified. And then I think it's the job of a sales rep, a sales manager, a sales director, a VP of sales, a CRO, whomever, is to work within that, work within the sales funnel and the sales stages to how do we increase the conversions at each and every step. That's our job.
But it doesn't seem to be happening the way it should. And I think that it seems like there's just been this, at least again in the SaaS sector, it seems like there's been this acceptance of, it's 20% off from our qualified opportunities in our pipeline and it's like, as long as we get enough coming in the top of the funnel, we'll just play the numbers game. But at some point, nobody deals with infinite markets, right? I mean, markets of infinite size. At some point, you can't have the same volume coming into the top of the funnel. And then you find yourself stuck because you really don't know how to, at that point, then really winnow out and close the really good prospects. So it's just this conundrum that I think that many companies are facing is that, the numbers game works great at a certain,
it's a hard game.
Yeah, at a certain phase of your growth curve, assuming it's somewhat like a bell curve. But at some point, you got to put a premium on that execution with the customer, discovery, qualification, make sure they're really a fit for what you're selling, and then close a higher fraction of them.
Yeah, and I think I certainly ascribe to that sort of philosophy. I think sales in a way is always a numbers game. It's just how big are those numbers that you're dealing with? And boy, I think it's hard if you're continually tasking the marketing team to just bring in more and more and more and more. You're going to get scorched earth. I don't know. I think you're going to get a lot of low quality, and then you are going to need a bigger SDR team.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what's happening for many companies already. Yeah, it's also almost as if people are saying, look, the way this works now is the way it's always going to work. And you and I have been through and have been in the business long enough to know that, I don't know, how many sales, quote unquote, revolutions have you and I personally experienced during the course of our careers? I mean, numerous, right? And this is just one more. And this is surely going to change. It's in the process of changing already, but it's surely going to change. And I think for me, the message is to sales managers, CROs, and so on is, it's tempted to sort of follow this recipe, but the world's changing as we speak. And that's just not, the recipe isn't sustainable for the way many companies have it set up.
I think that's true. I think I would say that sales professionals and CROs and VPs of sales, we're all trying to figure it out relative to the market we're in and how people want to be sold to. There's a lot of dynamics at play, which is what I love about it. I love that it's not the same. Mm-hmm. So I think, to me, that's what's fun about it, is that you get to continue to innovate and think about new ways to do things. And it really helps to have a strong marketing partner, kind of a strong go-to-market team, because we share a funnel. And I think the tighter that alignment, the easier it is to figure these things out, and also the more effective.
Yeah. Well, and I think that just a greater sense of the fact that you actually are in sales, and I know we all are participating in this increased mechanization of the sales process. But at the end of the day, you're still selling to a person, and I was talking to another VP of sales within the last couple of weeks, and a similar business model to the one I referred to up front. And his explanation for low close rate was too much competition. But my first thought was, you could have to go through the conversation was, well, yeah, but based on the conversation, you really don't have a handle on your discovery and your qualification processes. And so, it's easy to write off, the fact that we're suffering because of competition, but competition's a fact of life. You always have competition. But if you, really don't focus on, what do we have to do during the discovery to find out whether this is, in fact, a prospect that we could qualify, that could actually be a good fit for our product and service. And it's just like the level of attention to that was so low that, we didn't even get into the conversation about how they really qualified prospects.
Do you think this has changed over time, or do you think this is kind of always the way that it's been?
Well, I think it's changed a bit, and I think that's just because, given the tools at our disposal, I think you and I both say, look, while sales has always been a numbers game at root, right? And you need to know what your ratios are. There's been a greater emphasis placed on it in the last 5+ years. And that's not beneficial. I mean, it certainly has a role. You're never going to escape the numbers, but at some point, you gotta focus on that, discovery, the human-to-human aspect of, really understanding whether somebody's really a fit for what you're selling, and be willing to say, look, they're not a fit. And maybe we don't have the same pipeline coverage, but we're going to close a much higher fraction of our pipeline and arrive at the same spot. But instead, I think there's been all these metrics laid on top of managers these days that create behaviors that aren't aligned with the whole idea of closing a higher fraction of your prospects.
That hasn't been my experience. Let's say where I am now, I think everybody would be delighted. And in fact, we hired a CMO recently, and it's interesting that we're having this conversation because part of our strategy, just with marketing, kind of the SDR team and sales, is, hey, let's take a more targeted approach. Let's look at a smaller number of accounts that we think are really good for Logs.io and go a little wider, a little deeper, and really work on getting into these different sets of accounts. And there'll be a higher sales price, higher ARR. And maybe we'll close fewer of them, but it's more sustainable.
Yeah. Surprise.
Yeah.
I know you know that. I mean, you are one of the enlightened ones, but
I don't know if I'm enlightened. Maybe I'm one of the lazy ones.
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, I think that I think it's lazy to do what I talked about before. I mean, I think just trying to fill the top of the funnel and be satisfied with the relatively low close rate, I think that's lazy. I think it's harder to say, look, to do what you're talking about is let's be more targeted. Let's go a little deeper, raise our price a bit, and we're going to close a higher fraction of the people that come through because by definition, they're going to be more well qualified for what we're trying to sell. That's harder. It takes more work. The payoff is greater at the end, though.
I don't know if I don't know which one is. I don't know if I know which one is more work. I just know for me, it suits my style. I think I'm just
because you like to sell.
I do,
and I don't think. And I think that's part of the.
I do.
That's part of the thing with quite frankly, with a lot of sales managers that I was referencing is they really don't like to sell. Not in the way that you came up selling,
which is amazing to me.
But they like the idea of a process and sort of a machine. But getting their hands dirty with customers and actual hand-to-hand selling, not so much.
It's funny because it's one of the things that I love about my role and why I gravitate towards smaller companies is because I love the hands-on piece. I like I like being in it. Even in this time that we've been talking, I've been pinged 3 times by reps wanting my input on deals.
Wanting Captain Fantastic to come be fantastic.
I love it. And that's what I love. That's what I think is, for me, that's why I'm in this job. But people are different. There's some, but you've, I'm sure, met them. There are a lot of sales managers that it's all about process. It's numbers. They sit in an office. They look at spreadsheets. They go through Salesforce. That's what they do.
Yep. Oh, I know. That's the type of person I was talking about. So, yeah, it's not like everything in life. It's not all one or the other.
No, it's not at all.
It's finding the balance. And my point really was that it's sort of out of whack right now. We need to find that balance again. So, yeah, I know you gotta split on this one. So we'll talk to you next week. Another
episode.
Looking
forward to it.
This is 137 for us.
Gosh, where's the time gone?
I know. We have to stop meeting this way.
All
right. So
don't tell your wife.
Yeah, she knows. She actually listens. This is her.
I love it.
She listens. She reports every time. So, all right. Captain Fantastic. We will talk to you next week. Friends, thank you for joining us, and look forward to talking to you again next week.
Until next Wacky Wednesday, or whatever we decided to call it.
Still haven't. I'm falling down on the job.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Wily Wednesday.
All right. Bye-bye. Okay, friends, that was Accelerate for this week. First of all, I want to thank you for joining me, as always. Appreciate your support. I want to thank my guests, Patrick Purvis and my good friend, Bridget Gleason. Join me again next week as I welcome Tom Poland. Tom is the CEO of Leadsology, and he'll be joining us on the show. And of course, no Accelerate would be complete without swapping stories with Bridget. As always, she'll be joining me for our weekly conversation, so be sure to join us then. So thanks again to our sponsor, DiscoverOrg, for their ongoing support of Accelerate. And thanks again for joining me. Until next week, good selling, everyone.